Hello, welcome everyone.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Percy.
And here we go. Cheers to another Facebook Live. And look
Cheers.
at this. We're even matching. We didn't even consult each other what we're going to wear today.
We vibe like that.
Yeah.
That's how we roll.
I know. We kind of like finish each other's sentences and thoughts. And today we're going to be talking about how to jump out of an airplane in your relationships.
Yeah.
In love and sex. And what do we really mean by that?
Right.
So, Percy, why don't you tell your story what you did yesterday?
Yeah, so yesterday I actually did jump out of a plane. I went skydiving, and it was really insane. And afterwards, I guess, long story short, I can tell you some details and post some pictures below. But afterwards, I gained some wisdom because I was talking with my skydiving date, and I said, you know, we just jumped out of a plane. A lot of people would say that that's not really a smart thing to do. And she said, well, the survival rate's pretty high. And it's not smart not to take reasonable chances. And I kind of thought about how that applies to a lot of things.
Especially in relationships, because a lot of us are not jumping out of an airplane to make our relationships more fulfilling.
Right. So a lot of us aren't being vulnerable, aren't presenting the parts of us that we're hiding. And that can kill a relationship. And as we've talked about in videos before, it can keep you in an unconscious relationship and keep a relationship static.
Yeah.
Secondly, it also can keep a relationship from even starting. How often have you seen a person that you might feel curious about and might want to see if there's a relationship there and not taking the risk to jump out of the plane? And I know it feels like jumping out of a plane when you're being vulnerable, when you're saying, hey, there's an attraction here that I'm feeling, there's a chemistry. What can we do with this? So, and yeah, it can feel like jumping out of a plane, but you can always just stay in the plane and let it pass by and never jump out and never make it to the ground. And
when you don't make it to the ground on that plane, you don't jump out of that airplane, that's when you reach the end of your life. And you're like, oh, I shoulda, I woulda, I coulda. Because that beautiful book on top regrets of the dying, that's one of the things that they
Lessons
say.
from the Dying?
Lessons from, I think the top 5 regrets of the dying.
I see.
It says how when they interview people who are on their deathbed, they're really regretting all of the things that they did not do.
Right. Even when the survival rates are pretty high. The survival rates to being vulnerable in a relationship, most people don't die by doing that. There are maybe a few, but most people really don't die by doing that.
And I could share with you all the times that I have been vulnerable, not only in relationships, but in friendship and in all of the conflict-ridden areas that I needed to speak for myself, and thank goodness for the internal family systems model of speaking for parts. I have not died. You know, it has moved friendships and relationships to another level. Now, sometimes that person may not be ready for it,
right,
and they may stop. So let's share a story.
Sure.
I was speaking to a friend of mine. They're both high-powered people. The husband is a surgeon. Not the husband. The boyfriend is a surgeon, and the woman is a Wall Street type of person. So
you
pretty
watch out
alpha
for
people.
physicians there.
He is one.
Don't date a physician, whatever
you know
you
something? Dr. Percy Ballard, he is not your typical physician because he is a psychiatrist that's so into vulnerability and emotions.
Right.
You
and
are
definitely,
that.
for the record, I don't really mean that about physicians, but
well, especially in high-powered leadership positions, you know, people are driven because of the stuff that they have experienced in childhood.
Right, and they're not always used to being vulnerable, like you're saying.
Yeah, and what we're trying to teach in this paradigm is that the things that we're yearning for, we could have what we want through vulnerability, not only in love, but in friendship, but also in leadership. We're having a leadership crisis because leaders don't know how to be vulnerable, to own their faults. When you own your fault, you become real and authentic.
Yeah.
Because everybody else has faults and shame and vulnerability.
Yeah. So what do you mean by this? Tell me the story.
So let me tell you the story. So these two high-powered people, these friends of mine were, this particular friend of mine, let's call them Jack and Jill. Jill was telling me that she was really unsatisfied with this year-long boyfriend that she has had. They had lots of fun together, but every time she tried to get into a vulnerable conversation, about something, the feelings, it gets bottled up. She can't jump out of the airplane. And with him being a surgeon and busy and doing his alpha thing, he doesn't know how to go there either.
Right.
Because so many boys are being raised to like, boys don't cry, boys don't show emotions, and it's just our patriarchal way of being. And I think things are shifting now with the Me Too crisis, and we want to get rid of toxic masculinity. But that's all, it's happening right now. But in terms of relationship, after this 1-year relationship, she was consulting with me to ask me, what do I do? How do I get my boyfriend to open up? I can't do this anymore. We do things and then we have sex, and the sex is not even good. Because it's just performance-oriented sex as opposed to being present.
So it's connection-oriented sex.
Yeah. And so I tried to guide her. She didn't have the courage to do that. Then she finds out some things about her boyfriend that through the grapevine, that he wasn't all that he was cracked up to be. He had some shady records in his medical practice and whatnot. So she started to get turned off by him, but she didn't even have the courage to approach him with it. And he's not the partner. Neither of them are the partner that have the courage to jump out of the plane and speak for how they're feeling disconnected, how they want more.
Right.
And that is the death of the relationship.
Right.
And I asked her, why do you it's been a year, why are you still, there's a part of you that is just so magnetically drawn to him? And he says, well, I said, who does he remind you of? The unfinished business from childhood.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because usually, even though logically, we're saying, you know what, that guy's not doing anything for you, he's not treating you right, why can't you not forget about him or her? And you got to look back.
There's a deep reason for that.
The magical question is, who does this person remind you of from the past? Your mom, your dad, or some authority figure that really did you wrong, some caretaker. And usually you have one answer is to, it's my mother that did me more damage. So in her case, it was her mother that did more damage, very controlling, very judgmental. And so this boyfriend of hers, the energy of who he was, reminded her of the unfinished business.
It made her feel the same way that her mother made her feel at the time.
And she's trying to, because she felt really shut down from her mother. Her mother was always being judgmental and critical. And he would also, when she tried to say something, he would also have like judgmental parts in his nonverbal cues that he didn't really care about what she was saying.
But I could see how that would feel like jumping out of a plane, because in her case, she would have to, she's feeling like a little girl being vulnerable with her mother, which definitely feels like jumping out of a plane. So I could totally see how it would be difficult for her to do that.
And she wasn't understanding that.
Right.
And she didn't have the courage to do the work, to understand her parts so that she could speak vulnerably for them. And eventually he just stopped communicating with her because he wasn't really into it. He was really not that emotionally vested. Because when you don't have that emotional depth, you don't really get emotionally vested as much. The pull just, for some people, it just gets further and further apart. It's like, is there anything to the relationship?
Yeah, so that's pretty sad. You're saying they had a really good mutual attraction.
Initially,
but because they couldn't be vulnerable with one another, things fizzled out.
Things fizzled out,
Right.
exactly.
Wow.
So that's where these two people are essentially operating at half-truth.
Okay.
Neither of them are able to jump both feet out of the airplane.
Right.
They
To reveal
both have
what
one
they're
foot.
thinking, to reveal what their parts are saying, to reveal that I would like to be closer to you, to reveal that, what did they have trouble revealing to one another?
Yes. And you know what? And if one person jumps out of the plane and reveals what's really going on, and the other person still has, well, no, I got only 1 foot out.
Right.
I'm not comfortable jumping both feet in.
You're just not going to meet on the ground. When I jumped out of the plane yesterday, I jumped first. I think that wasn't by my choice. It's just how it happened. But right. my date could have just stayed in the plane and been like, okay, I don't want to do that. But right, she jumped out of the plane and we met at the ground. And in a lot of ways in that relationship, she jumps first as far as being vulnerable, and I got to jump behind in order to really keep things on the same level.
That's a great metaphor. You got to jump. They jumped out of the plane. You got to jump and meet them. Otherwise, one's going to be over here, and the other one's going to be off to better opportunities.
Right.
And so that's her experience. And then I've also had a recent experience where I jumped both feet out of the airplane, and this is in a friendship, and the other person just did not even want to meet me where I was, because this person was full of fears, I believe, with what would it mean if they jumped with both feet in.
Right. Well, so I guess this quote from this person is always going to stay with me. So, would you want to continue your book, present the book first? Or?
Yes. Well, you have to go ahead and share the quote, and then I will share a very powerful quote from a beautiful book.
So just the quote one more time. The survival rate is pretty high. And think of the areas in your life where the survival rate is pretty high, but you're afraid. So the survival rate is pretty high. And I don't think it's smart to not take reasonable chances, right? So the survival rate is pretty high, and I don't think it's not smart to not take reasonable chances, is what she said. So what areas in your life are you not taking reasonable chances, although the survival rate is pretty high? So, and you can feel free to post those below.
Yeah, and the other question is, are you going to regret not taking the chances at the end of your life? That's how I make decisions these days. What am I going to regret? Am I going to regret this if I don't do this or say this to someone at the end of my life? Because I've spoken my truth. This is about speaking the whole truth, not the half truth. This is not about covering up the half truth with white lies and excuses. Because when you do that, you are not building intimacy. You are breaking bonds.
Right. Makes things go stale.
Yeah. And because you're afraid of what the truth is going to reveal. If you spoke for your insecurities and your fears, yeah, I'm afraid.
Right. Can we say, I want to say a few words, because it comes to mind as far as how do you, when you're afraid, how do you jump? And I think for me, in the airplane on the way up, there were parts of me that were afraid that I had to speak to and I had to hold and say, okay, it's going to be okay. We'll do this. I'll meet you at the bottom. I'll be here the whole way. And I had to hold the hand of my scared parts in order to jump out of the plane. And, when I did, it was just like, okay, there was adrenaline there. That's about all I could see. There was nothing there but that little ledge that I, stepped out onto. And then, below, just like the ground, 20,000 feet up. So, but right, sometimes we have to talk ourselves through and talk our afraid parts through the jumps that we want to make in our lives. And so, and we have posted videos, and we'll post a lot more videos about talking to those scared parts.
Yeah. And this is also understanding the forces of, you're not going to get what you want until you take the equivalent risk. It's the physics of it all. How much risk are you willing to take to get what you want? Because doing the same thing over and over again, you are not going to get what you want. You have to do something differently. So if you're yearning for more, not feeling satisfied, what is that one risk that you can take that you could say, I did my best. If they do not receive my vulnerabilities, then I really have to rethink, am I wasting my time with this person? So I think this quote from the end of one of my favorite books on relationships, this is a novel called Uncommon Bond, written by Brene Brown. This is based on the author's real life experiences turned into a novel of a really intense spiritual relationship. Because when we're really spiritually connected to someone, which not all of us are going to experience, but when that spiritual connection happens, it's really intense because it brings up all of your shadow parts, all the parts of you, the fears, the insecurities, the shame that hasn't been addressed yet. And so essentially, yeah.
That's fear. Yeah.
That's fear. That's fear. And the thing that you have to remember is every single person on this planet has shame. We all have had significant childhood moments where we have been devalued and felt not good enough. Even if mom just like looked at you in a funny way, didn't have to say anything. Or even if the teacher said, oh, there you go again, you made that mistake again. Or not being accepted on the varsity baseball team. That can have huge ramifications. That's shame.
Right.
So that all comes out in the most intense way when you end up partnering with somebody in a spiritual relationship where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't get this person out of my energy field, out of my mind, because it's all the unresolved karma, unresolved stuff that you have not addressed. So at the end of this book, which I won't give away the ending, it's a fabulous book on common bond, there's a paragraph that just summarizes this whole thing about the struggles that many of us are facing in long-term relationships. It seems counterintuitive to romantics and those who feel ready to partner when someone walks away from a beautiful love connection. But some people can only handle a half love because whole love shines a light on their dark places. Real intimacy requires real presence. And if someone isn't ready to be truly here on an individual level, they'll find it very difficult to manage all the triggers that come up when real love comes. Only a small few can hold the gate open when profound love enters, a blessed and courageous few.
Right. Well, it's hard to do, so it's understandable.
Very difficult to do, and that's why the more, if you want to be on this kind of journey where you want to feel the eroticism, the passion, the aliveness, that's produced from somebody that usually reminds you of somebody that you have unfinished business from childhood, that energy of I can't stop thinking about them. There's potential in that, but so rarely does this kind of relationship ever make it on its own. You need help. You need the right type of therapist, couples therapist. You need the right type of personal growth programs and spiritual development, because otherwise the relationship is not going to survive. And that's why if you want such intimacy that's out of this world, you must work on yourself and understand shame and vulnerability at its core, because we all have it. And so there's a couple of other books that are really powerful to help you to understand shame and vulnerability, and why understanding how to be courageously vulnerable is the number one source of power and fulfillment and joy, because that allows you to connect with others. And it gives other people permission to do the same, to drop their armor, and that's where true intimacy happens. So Brene Brown, B-R-E-N-E, Brown, is the famous psychologist, world's famous psychologist that talks about shame and vulnerability. She has 2 of the top 10 TED Talks on shame, one on vulnerability, and she is a New York Times bestseller of many, many books, including Daring Greatly, how the courage to be vulnerable transforms the way we live, love, parent, and lead.
Yeah. You want to hold that a little bit closer?
Yes.
I don't know if, yeah, there we can see it.
And the gifts of imperfection. We are all perfectly imperfect. And when you can show through your vulnerability how imperfect you are and speak for the parts of you from the past, that sometimes shows up and has temper tantrums, that's what builds intimacy, but you have to know how to do that. And then Percy recently gave me a homework to read this book, Models.
Yeah, so Models by Mark Manson. I suppose if you are a heterosexual male that's new on the dating scene, it might apply to women, it might apply to people of various diversities, but it's written from the standpoint of a heterosexual male, and really talking about getting onto the dating scene and being vulnerable and attracting people through one's vulnerability and honesty. So it's a really good book. It's just, you know, psychologically healthy, sound. It's not talking about games and gimmicks or anything like that. It's talking about being real, which I appreciate, and it makes it a lot easy to not have to be disingenuous on the dating scene. So.
Yeah, so I just started reading this, and after I'm done reading this, Percy and I will do a video specific to this of how, especially for heterosexual males, that vulnerability is your #1 source of power, and you have to learn how to do vulnerability right. And then when you can receive, especially from your partner's perspective, if they start to open the gate to vulnerability, and then you meet them there, and you jump out of the airplane together, oh, those are some powerful ingredients for long-term, amazing intimacy.
Right. So it's hard to jump out of the plane, but remember there are tools, there are parachutes, and the survival rate is still pretty high. And you know, a lot of what we talk about are those tools. How to speak for your parts, how to be vulnerable in a way that can be heard, in a way that can be felt. And so if you are interested, please do subscribe to our channel, join the Facebook group, and feel free to post below. What ways could you take reasonable risks that you're not, and how is it holding you back? Just think about that. And we will be posting videos soon, and you can review some videos on our channel that describe ways of being vulnerable, give you examples, role plays.
We already made plenty of those videos, yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just challenge you to ask yourself this one question. Are you sharing the whole truth every time?
Ooh.
Or are you only sharing half-truth, and you're keeping secrets or making excuses and white lies because you don't want to hurt the other person?
Right.
Well, guess what? You're hurting the other person big time by not revealing your whole truth.
No judgment, we all do it.
We all do it, but
right.
you know what? I don't, if someone says something that I don't like, or I don't want to do something, I'm going to be honest and say, you know, I just want to let you know where I am at. I don't want to string you along.
Mm-hmm.
And think about all the situations where in dating situations,
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to either break off with someone, or you can't like seem to tell them the real reason why.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to go to such and such event with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep using excuses.
Oh yeah. Well,
oh my
yeah,
gosh, that's self-sabotage.
Right.
You're going to sabotage yourself right out of that relationship.
Oh, well, that's courageous vulnerability. Really speaking for what's true for you, speaking for your parts in a vulnerable way, and there can be ways to do that in a compassionate way as well.
Yeah, so I would invite you to share this video if you found it useful, so that other people can learn the power of jumping out of the airplane and starting to be vulnerable, and getting the tools and learning through videos and books on how to do that. Because that's what's going to make your life fulfilling.
Yeah, feel the thrill.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, cool.
Okay, take care.